Thank you for joining us. Also, record our conversation a bit. That way, for anyone who had to go and couldn't join us, can also be here. Rachel and I'm one of those kind of magicians who I ruin the magic trick really early because I tell you the rabbit's been in the hat the entire time. So Rachel and I have developed some questions. Part of it kind of grown out of our conversation with Reverend Adalphie, and sent them to her. That's why we've got some papers here. But also Rachel and I will ask a couple follow-up questions. We'll engage in a bit of conversation, and then we'll try and leave some space towards the end in case all of you have some questions based upon what you've heard, things you want to know a little bit later on. Sound good? Yeah. All right. Very good. First, thank you again for coming. I think our first question is really giving space to get to know you a little bit more personally. So you serve as a bivocational minister, amongst other things. I mean, I don't know how you pack in as much work in the hours of the day, but it is impressive. Among them being the associate pastor at the community church, also director of programs at Smile. Mm-hmm. And so I guess in the beginning, maybe just hearing a little bit from you of why do you feel called to these particular ministries? And then in addition to that, how do you see them as intertwined together?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you all hear me pretty good? Okay, awesome. So when I think back to my own personal journey, I don't want you to take that. Thank you.
Got a wanderer here.
Yes. When I think back to my own personal journey and what it meant for me growing up as a Black queer woman in D.C., there were so many opportunities that I felt like I missed out on. I did not know that there was an organization like Smile, where I currently work, that had been in existence for over 30 years. I didn't know that there were other affirming and accepting places that I could bring my whole queer identity into the space that I was in and be celebrated and loved. I spent all of my time growing up in the church, and so church is just an innate part of who I am. And even in the church setting, the church was affirming, but there were also still a lot of questions around the people within the church. And if they really, affirmed who I was, or people like me, if they really accepted who I was and people like me. So it created this bit of a struggle, right? And we're talking about at 14, 15, because I knew early on, I would say even as young as 5, like who I was as far as sexual orientation when it concerned me. And so there was this deeply rooted, call, if you will, if we want to use this very churchy type language, this call that said there's something that you have to offer to the world that was not offered to you. And this is where the work started for me. I have been in nonprofit work all of my life. Jesus has been a part of everything that I've done, even in moments where I was upset and mad with Jesus, because of how people acted, right? Or how people treated people like me. But I continue to ensure that I allowed for my work to be a part of changing that narrative. So being very intentional about the spaces that I went to for employment, being very intentional about ensuring that whatever I did, that it really helped to meet the need of young people not being able to have some of the same challenges and experiences that I did growing up. And so it's always been important for me, even when I received my call to ministry, to be bivocational, because I'm like, for me, like, church is great and church is wonderful, but there's so many people that will never step foot in the church. And so how do we still allow for our work to reach those individuals who will never come inside these doors? And still, allow for them to know that they are loved, that they are cared for? How do we still represent Jesus, even when sometimes we cannot even mention the name of Jesus because of trauma, because of church hurt, and all of those things? So how I see these pieces bridge together for me, yes, on Sunday mornings, I spend all of my time preaching and teaching at my church. Yes, all of the meetings and et cetera that go forth and happen. However, because of the work that I do, anybody in my congregation knows if you need condoms, you better call Pastor AJ. If you need to find out where a needle exchange program is, call Pastor AJ. If you're having struggles with, acceptance within your family or reconciling your faith, call Pastor AJ. If she cannot help you navigate through those pieces, because of my connections and et cetera within the community, I can at least steer folks in another direction. So for me, like those two pieces work hand in hand. I can't work Jesus or do Jesus without working and doing the community. And for some, they're able to package those places and those things into one. For me, I have to do both. It just has to happen that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Thank you so much. This kind of, I think, follows your personal story, but in your work with Smile, I know you care a lot for like physical and emotional needs, and I just remember you talking a lot over the summer when we met with you about how there are spiritual needs in the communities, and so I just wonder, what are some of those spiritual needs that you see, even if you can't, like as you said, directly speak the name of Jesus, what are those, needs there, and then how can churches help journey along with queer youth?
Sure. So, I'll preface this by saying, too often folks believe that there is a huge disconnect between one's sexual orientation, gender identity, and their spiritual growth. And people tend to not see that they coincide together. And there have also been studies done, and there's data to show forth that spiritual practices, spiritual development is one of the top things that is very important for queer and trans individuals. So knowing that this is the case, how are we creating these spaces where folks can, again, bring their whole selves into the space? And so I kid folks often at Smile, because we're not a religious-based organization, but anything dealing with spirituality, they're like, oh, she has her MDiv. Oh, she's in school working on her doctoral degree. Oh, we can go ping that stuff right to her. And so I find myself sitting with young people who literally are saying, my parents told me I'm going to hell. Do you think that is true? And my response is no, you're not. But then having to reaffirm them to say, here are the reasons why, God loves you. Here are the reasons why you are fearfully and wonderfully made. All these things that we read about in the scriptures, right? But helping young people to see that this is who you are. And even understanding and knowing that in providing that affirmation, that can go against all the things that they've been taught growing up. And so once they leave my space, they still have to go home. So how do we then prepare young people to feel empowered and to feel safe, even in spaces that are not affirming when they're thinking about their spiritual development and growth? So ensuring that, folks are reminded on a consistent basis, I love you. I tell everybody I love them. I don't care who it is, where you've been, where you have not been. Everybody that walks into my presence is going to know that I love them. And how do we replicate that in other spaces so that when, the holidays are a very challenging time for people, they go home to families that are not affirming. And, they may not use their proper pronouns, or, they may misgender them, or, things of that sort, or say really mean and hurtful things to them. But how, as a church, can we pour into individuals, make disciples of Christ, right? That's what it's about. How are we empowering people to go out and be fishers of individuals, to say, you're still loved. God still loves you. So even if that is in messages on our Facebook pages, when we talk about how we're creating these outward-facing, affirming spaces, and the messages and the teachings that come from the pulpits, even down to, in our children's ministries and our youth ministries, how we're creating opportunities for folks to receive affirming messages that they then can go back and share with others. Because young people, I don't believe I'm old. Let me say this. I think that I am very young. However, if I'm talking to a young person that's 12 or 13, they may look at me like, honey, you've been here since Moses was here. Like, there's a disconnect in this generation, right? But how am I able to empower young people to then go out and then talk to their peers? How can you do that within your churches so that your youth now have a job to do? They now are going out to spread and share the gospel, because there are young people in their schools that we may never see. But yet they're able to give an expression of love and inclusion.
That's a beautiful framing of this kind of great commandment, great commission, but in the practical ways it is lit. In the classroom, in every space you go, bringing that message. That's really beautiful. And it, it makes me think, and again, when as Rachel and I were thinking about some of the kind of powerful kind of moments we had as we were talking with you, you're describing the work in which for youth, not only hearing a message that is the kind of radically inclusive love of God that is for them, but also preparing them in a world that doesn't often share that message, right? And then there is how, in everywhere we can, whether it's at Smile or it's in the church, how do we, create these spaces in which that can not just be heard, but it's felt kind of down in the bones, right?
Yeah.
And I know that as we talked, and you were describing Smile and the space there, and you were talking, I remember you talking about what it's like to see youth come alive when they come into a space where their identities are centered, where there is this kind of space of belonging. So for those who have not been down to Smile, can you describe it a bit for us?
Yeah.
And then what's it like for you as you're leading these youth to watch them come alive in that moment?
Yeah. So Smile is located right in the Eastern Market area of Southeast DC. So right off of 7th and Pennsylvania Avenue in Southeast. It is centrally located in the middle of a residential neighborhood. So if you can imagine row houses, connected together, there's 2 row houses that are painted the same shade of blue, right? And, there's a front yard with some sunflowers and maybe some other, shrubs or whatever that are outside. And there's a very small placard on the outside of the building that says SMYAL, SMYAL, supporting and mentoring youth advocates and leaders. That's what it stands for. There is a very thin rainbow tag directly underneath. Now, folks may say, do you all have flags outside? We don't. Do you have other markers outside the building to say that you all are queer and, trans affirming? We don't. And why is that the case? Because a lot of our young people shared with us that they desire not to be othered just coming into the space. And it becomes a challenge when they think about their friends that may be not accepting, if they may not be out to other individuals, to walk in a place that from the outside is so, visually inclusive, of LGBTQ individuals and paraphernalia. So that's on the outside. Now, when you step across the door, it's like, the rainbows and all the things have thrown up on the inside of the building. We have bean bags in every single color of the rainbow. On one wall, we have, the last time I counted when I was in office, there was about 14 flags that we have printed out for all the different representations within the queer and trans community. Our bookshelf is characterized by rainbow colors, right? It's that type of space. And then, even the things, all of our restrooms are gender neutral. Folks use whatever restroom that feels most comfortable and best for you. Our staff, I would say, is 99%, maybe 98%, out LGBTQ individuals. And so there is when they step into the space, it's opportunity for folks to exhale. They're able to take off, the baggage and the weight from the outside. They're able to take off the identities that other folks try to place on them. They're able to take off the unrealistic expectations that have been placed on them by other family members, by other community members, and literally walk into a space where they are the majority and not the minority. Where, folks who are allies not necessarily have to ask permission to come into the space, but it has to be community agreements that allies can enter into the space to ensure that we are completely centering the voices of our queer and trans youth, ensuring that we take young people on field trips, ensuring that, any language that we have on representation on the walls, whether it's posters, that it's not just cishet families, right? That we're showing a different variety of family structures and persons within families and et cetera. And so having that opportunity and having those spaces for folks to really express themselves in whichever way they desire. If they want to come in crop tops and really short shorts, then you come in crop tops and really short shorts. You know, if you have, you know, interchange pronouns from one day or 1 second to another, that's completely okay. You know, we're not married to you having to show up in one particular way just to be able to be here. We want you to bring whoever you are into the space, and we create and cultivate that space together.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's insanely beautiful. I know for me, walking into spaces that are clearly affirming by their showing of that means so much rather than just telling. It means that you feel like you can belong. I wonder, like, on that note, like, how has your lived experience and your work at Smile kind of allowed you to shape your vision for churches and how they can create and cultivate these spaces of belonging?
That's a really great question. So based upon my personal experiences of at times feeling othered in spaces and times of not feeling included, it has forced me, you know, in a very loving yet accountable way to ensure that I do not replicate those spaces for other individuals. And how that can show up is as a lesbian, queer, identified woman who also is cisgender. It's very easy for me to prioritize my identities, even though my identities in some way, shape, or form are marginalized. However, in that space and in those opportunities, I have to be even more intentional about ensuring that my non-binary siblings, my trans siblings, feel just as supported, feel just as included, feel just as heard, feel just as visible as I desire to allow for myself to be seen and to be heard and to be visible. And it's hard, y'all. When I say it's hard, because there's some folks that come into faith spaces and say that I didn't come in here for all that. I came because I wanted to hear a word, you know, to give my stewardship and to go back home. But then what does it mean to then live out what it truly means to be a beloved community and how we're shaping and creating those spaces? And even when I think about ministry for myself and even think about children, because I know young people understand gender identity and sexual orientation at much younger ages, how are we then even also reaching back to our little ones? Not waiting until they're 12 or 13 to have conversations and discussions around it. But how can we, you know, engage these conversations in a very age-appropriate way in these spaces now? One of the things that happened, so when I started working at Smile, we only serviced young people ages 13 and above. And we started receiving a lot of phone calls just saying, hey, I have a 6-year-old who's gender expansive, or I have a 5-year-old who's transgender, or, you know, I have a 4-year-old for that matter who is exploring sexual orientation. But there's nowhere for them to go. You know, everyone is saying, oh, you need to send them to a therapist. Oh, you need to send them to a clinician. When those things are great, but children just really need community. So we created a program for young people as young as 6, and I will even say that even though we started at 6, we have some young people in our program that are 3 and 4 that are very clear on who they are. More clear than what I know some adults are on who they are. And all they desire to do is to be in community with other people. So even for me, ministry is, from my experiences, how can we then also create spaces for our little people where they're able to thrive, where they're able to feel accepted, where they're able to meet other people that may have some similar or like experiences for them in the safety of the church, in the safety of this spiritual place that also, you know, provides this spiritual development and growth.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. I want to make sure we've got a few more minutes together. If there are questions from all of you who are here, things maybe you've heard today in the sermon or in this conversation you'd like to know more about. What are you curious about? It's the quietest I've ever seen a group of Baptists.
I welcome all the questions, all the questions.
Questions from our youth? Got a bunch of youth here. Things y'all want to know? Yeah, I called on you. Too bad. I'm a pastor. I get to do that. No?
They're like, you're going to ask. No, you're going to ask.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, Mary, here, let me bring a mic to you. That way others can hear your question.
Hi, so thanks for being here. My question is, what would you think is a good way for a church to show, not just to say, but to show that they're welcoming and inclusive?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So there are a couple of things that can happen. One, so Our Whole Lives, are you all familiar with Our Whole Lives? Our Whole Lives, OWL? You're shaking your head, yeah. So Our Whole Lives has a really excellent curriculum for young people on up through adults that is comprehensive, that is intentionally inclusive, that really speaks to just like the sexual health, well-being, spiritual development, and growth for all persons, right? So that's one way, being able to bring curriculum into your faith spaces to be able to show forth the intentionality around it. I will also say through your preaching and teaching, but those are like low-hanging fruit pieces, right? But then also looking for ways to be involved in community. So if there is an organization maybe in this area or even outside of this area that you know that is doing LGBTQ work or queer and trans work, intentionally partner with them and maybe host an event at that space. Perhaps maybe do some sort of joint effort together where either you all as a congregation are going to them or you open your doors and allow for them to come to you, maybe to use space for an event that they're having, right? Low-hanging fruit pieces, of course, participating in the marches and the rallies and, all those things that happen. I will also say there is at least one calendar day a month that is some day of remembrance or honor around LGBTQ individuals. Talk about that during worship service. So whether it's Trans Day of Remembrance, whether it's Trans Visibility Week, whether it's, a host of other things, but being able to highlight those pieces and use them as educational points, include some information in the bulletin, add something to the website. But then also, what you all are currently doing now. That's a step, and that's a part of that work. Some people desire to hang flags outside, if it works, that's great. If it doesn't, it's completely okay, right? But just being able to find those other tangible things that can be done, having an inclusive Sunday, where you all are very intentional about, including marginalized communities. And if there's, one particular focus that you want to have or another, based upon having, scripture readings, songs, if, homilies, anything that is connected with that seeks to highlight the voices of queer and trans folk. And I say, again, continue to have the conversations. Because for some people, this is the first time they've ever been able to sit in a space and have this level of dialogue. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here today. It's been really fantastic to be able to have this conversation. I have a question. When it comes to individuals who grew up in a church and were hurt by the church, do you have any suggestions? Like the things that you just mentioned were really great, but when you're having individual conversations with people that you would love to be able to bring them back into a place of worship, how would you drive a conversation like that?
Yeah, so some people may disagree with what I'm going to tell you, but I find it to work and to be true. Sometimes the most impactful conversations mention nothing of God and Jesus. Share, I love you, Share, I hear you. Share conversations around affirming this person's identity and who they are. And even, in discussions and allowing for them to lead, do you want to talk about the things within the church that hurt you? Do you want to talk about, if you had the opportunity to create a beloved community within the church, what would that look like for you? How would that feel for you? What work are you doing to help heal that church hurt that you've experienced so that you can then open yourself back up to be able to receive? Conversations about, will you come to church with me? They may not happen till 6, 12 months down the line. But what they will remember is that you engage with them. What they will remember is that you love them in all of who they were. What they will remember is that you said that you were a Christian, and this is how you enacted your Christian values in love, not by trying to persuade them one way or another, but simply by being present. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Others? Any other questions? Reminded of that quote from St. Francis, preach the gospel always, and if necessary, use words.
Yes.
It seems that's a beautiful way to. Well, we've come. I want to honor Adalphie's time and also your time. So I've got one final question for you, and that is, what haven't we asked you that you'd like us to hear or to know?
I don't know if I will frame this as a question, but more so as like parting words, right? Be gentle with yourself. You're not expected to have all the answers. You're not expected to tomorrow shift all the wrong that has happened in the world. Be gentle with others. Just as it's a process for you, it is going to be a process for others. Lean in when you can. Take a step back to reflect when you need to. And I believe and know that there are individuals right here within this space that are willing to do this work with you. We cannot do this work by ourselves. And so just be intentional about ensuring that you connect with your neighbor, you connect with those that have questions. Sometimes individuals have questions and really are not coming from a mean place. They just don't know. So how will we also creating spaces and ensuring that you cultivate spaces where persons can wrestle with their own ideologies, with their own theologies, in a place where they're able to grow into being what God has called for them to be.
Amen. Adalphie, I'm so grateful again for this time and just your commitment to the love of Jesus and helping people to know that they are deep. It shines through in every answer that you gave today, and it's just beautiful to see that come alive. And so thank you for sharing that gift with us today. So if you all, can we give just a round of applause as our sign of thanks as a community. So thank you all for being here, for being a part of this, and again, we'll continue to, this not to be the only conversation we have, but continuing to have conversation, and I think to go forth from here in those words, to be gentle to ourselves and to others, and to always embody God's love, that's worth pondering some more. So blessings today, and we will see you next week. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Everybody.